President Donald Trump's new 55% super tariff has turned Emmanuel Macron into the EU's economic defense commander. A draft leaked from Washington last month made headlines around the world with the statement, "There will be a 25% tax on French cars, 40% on wine and cheese, and 55% on Airbus parts." As the Paris stock market turned red within minutes, Emmanuel Macron entered the emergency summit in Brussels and uttered a single sentence. "If we remain passive, tomorrow we will mortgage our bodies, and the day after tomorrow, our engines." At that moment, the European Union began preparing its automatic mirror retaliation shield and establishing supply consortiums with Japan and South Korea to bypass customs barriers. With the transatlantic market boiling from within, France is challenging Washington directly on the economic front for the first time, and the route of global supply chains is being redrawn. So how will the tax battle, ranging from cars to brie cheese, shake up transatlantic trade? We will examine the details of the latest developments around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our videos to stay up to date with our content. In June 2025, both sides of the Atlantic found themselves in the midst of a multi-layered storm. On one side, Donald Trump, back in office in the United States, was preparing a broad list of tariffs ranging from steel to agriculture under his fair share doctrine. On the other, the European Union was waiting for the wave to hit the shore, trying to protect its internal political lines. French President Emmanuel Macron found himself at the center of this geo-economic tension. Although Paris was not the only capital willing to fight with Washington, its political reflexes pushed it into the position of the stakeholder that responded most quickly to this fight. Macron's harsh tone resonated not only in the microphones of the Élysée Palace, but also in the ranks of the European Council, accustoming all member states to the idea of a united response. The first shockwave on the agenda came with the Trump cabinet's draft report leaked on May 15th. The report proposed tariffs of 25% on EU-made passenger cars, 40% on French cheese and wine, and 55% on certain high-value components from the aerospace industry. These rates were even harsher than the partial steel-aluminum dispute in 2018. The Paris Stock Exchange initially responded by dropping the CAC 40 index by 3%, followed by a sharp sell-off in Renault, Stellantis, and Airbus shares. While the French Ministry of Finance set up a crisis committee, Élysée advisors recommended a policy of strategic speed rather than strategic silence. This strategy is characterized by sudden press statements instead of slow diplomacy, concrete lists of retaliatory measures instead of vague expectations, and a show of determination to global investors rather than attempts to boost domestic consumer morale. Macron, speaking at the Extraordinary Leaders Summit in Brussels, abandoned his usual diplomatic tone. There were no Shakespeare quotes, startup nation metaphors, or witty remarks about palace diplomacy. He directly stated, "Our economic sovereignty requires responsibility. If we remain passive, tomorrow it will be aircraft bodies. The day after tomorrow, electric motors, and the day after that, our agricultural exports will be mortgaged." It did not take long for this harshness to be put into writing. French Economy and Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire, along with his counterparts from Germany, the Netherlands, and Italy, signed a letter of intent introducing a new mechanism called the European Crisis Tariff Network. The mechanism would immediately impose tariffs on critical inputs originating in Washington based on a mirror list logic, meaning that reciprocal tax measures would be automatically triggered. Why did this retaliation package come from Paris rather than Brussels? The answer lies in France's industrial DNA. Compared to other EU economies, the country has a distinctly mixed model in agriculture, manufacturing, and services, with the automotive, luxury goods, and aviation sectors forming the backbone of France's high-value added export profile. This is precisely why Trump's double tariff sword seemed most likely to strike France. Macron reacted quickly, playing not only on the concept of a military alliance, but also on the doctrine of economic defense, thus drawing a line that transcended Berlin's tradition of restraint, Rome's internal political instability, and Warsaw's obligation to stay close to Washington. While Paris's sudden leadership caused consternation in the corridors of Brussels, the Commission President's Chief of Staff stated that a voluntary preemptive move by a member state creates positive pressure as long as it does not conflict with the common legal framework. This press release was interpreted by the European media as a semi-official green light. What was unexpected on the Washington side was Macron's decision to exert pressure not only through mass communication, but also through third countries. French Foreign Trade Minister Olivier Becht presented a proposal for a supply consortium based on the Eurocode to Tokyo and Seoul during his tour of Asia. The aim was to place the flow of critical chips and battery materials in a stability ring independent of Atlantic tariffs. This initiative, which coincided with Trump's heavier tariff package on China, pushed the Japan-South Korea bloc into a between two fires psychology. Paris turned this psychology to its advantage, sending the message that if US pressure grows, we will offer you partnership as an alternative market. Trade diplomats in Brussels labeled these proposals the French stiletto, strategic moves that are narrowly targeted, controlled, but deeply cutting. Macron also stole the show in the political war of words. The French leader used wordplay in the Élysée Palace press garden, saying, "Europe is a common market, while America's customs barriers are a non-common wall." The White House press secretary responded by saying, "France is distorting the truth under pressure from local lobbies, and President Trump is working to correct unfair practices." This virtual spat triggered intraday fluctuations in the euro-dollar parity. Markets opened speculative euro short positions at levels not seen in a long time based on the leader's rhetoric. When the European Central Bank announced that it would not intervene despite the volatility, investors began to wonder whether there would be further sell-offs. Cool-headed observers of the crisis pointed to Macron's anti-hegemony quest and his dance with China. France is the only major power pursuing both critical diplomacy and a policy of openness toward China on the European stage. Beijing sees Paris as a key partner in French nuclear reactor licenses, Airbus joint ventures, and Red Sea security projects. Macron is now trying to turn this antagonism-cooperation dynamic into a card to play against Washington. The idea that if the Americans pull out the trade weapon, Europe will become a bulletproof steel armor for its Asian partners is Paris's subtext. Brussels, however, is quite cautious. This is because Germany feels US pressure to curb trade with China and is not keen on the France-China rapprochement weakening Germany's competitive position. Nevertheless, when Berlin hears the domestic automotive lobby's argument that the US market is already shrinking, it supports Macron rather than trying to rein him in. Moreover, the German Greens describe transatlantic tensions as an opportunity to escape the fossil fuel industry on the grounds of climate targets. The shockwaves of trade tensions have begun to be felt in public finances. The French Budget Office had forecast 4.8% growth for the end of 2025, but this estimate has been revised down to 2.9% if the tariff spiral materializes. If exports' contribution to national income declines, the public debt to GDP ratio will rise. Credit rating agencies have placed the country on negative watch. Macron's team anticipated this and decided to expand the Industrial Resilience Fund. The fund's capital comes partly from the state, partly from the European Investment Bank, and partly from private pension assets. So the cost is not borne solely by the Treasury. The reaction is similar to the US Inflation Reduction Act's funding mechanism, but it is a multi-source model. European companies are granted long-term, zero-coupon loans when they invest in green agreement-compliant facilities. In the agricultural dimension of the tariff war, France has also prepared its own unique cards. If the US imposes tariffs on symbolic segments of French agriculture, Brie cheese, Bordeaux wine, Provence olive oil, Paris plans to tighten health labeling standards. On products such as California almonds, Idaho potatoes, and Missouri corn, as a countermeasure. Without officially calling it protection, it is possible to curb imports through technical parameters such as fat content, pesticide residues, and carbon footprint. WTO rules allow for this because member countries can impose restrictions on imports for public health or environmental reasons, as long as they are not discriminatory. Paris is playing precisely in this grey area. Both the US and third countries will be subject to the same tariff schedule, preserving formal equality, but in essence, US products will be hit hard. In the southern part of the continent, Spain, Italy, and Greece expressed concern that France's tough stance will also hit our tourism and production. But the Élysées' lobbying power prevailed. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni supported Macron in a statement made in Rome, saying, "The EU must respond holistically, otherwise the common market will appear divided during our presidency." This support came in exchange for limiting the supply chain risk of joint French-Italian aviation and defense projects. Greece is concerned that transatlantic tensions will overshadow energy diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean, but Athens has gained the luxury of distancing itself from US tensions thanks to its openness to Chinese investment. In short, Macron's demands did not create divisions within the EU, but rather motivated active solidarity. How are these moves being interpreted in Washington? According to information leaked from the White House, Trump's advisors are divided into two camps. The hawks classify France as Europe's activist leader, not its rival, and recommend even tougher measures, while the pragmatists advise backing down, pointing to the EU's capacity to respond with a macroeconomic storm. Op-ed articles published in the Wall Street Journal warned that if Trump wields the tariff weapon too much, confidence in the dollar will be shaken, and fiscal discipline will be challenged as the Fed faces inflationary pressures. Transatlanticists within the GOP are pressuring Republican campaign strategists, arguing that France's retaliation could cost them serious votes in states with strong agricultural lobbies. In the geopolitical undercurrent, France's increased budget contribution to NATO is also on the table. Paris has raised its defense spending to 2.2% of GDP for 2024 and updated its 2026 target to 2.5%. Trump has long criticized allies for free riding, so France's spending increase should theoretically please Washington. However, Paris has announced that it will channel part of this budget into the European military-industrial ecosystem. This means that arms purchases will go to Euro consortia, such as Dassault, Airbus Defence, MBDA, and Nexter instead of Lockheed or Boeing, and the proportion of missiles or helicopters imported from the US will decrease. This has a negative impact on US defense exports and undermines Trump's claim that we will create jobs. The cultural undercurrent of the crisis is also noteworthy. French intellectual circles are commenting that tariffs are not just about economics, they are a weapon of identity. In the shadow of this whole landscape, European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde, a Paris-born former finance minister, has called for a middle way. But Lagarde's middle way is focused on limiting financial shocks rather than reducing psychological tensions between Brussels and Washington. The ECB will continue to tighten euro liquidity, but will expand repo lines when necessary to counter price shocks caused by customs tariffs. In other words, monetary weapons could serve as a buffer to prevent a heated conflict between the EU and the US. This monetary flexibility is preventing European financial markets from unraveling, despite France's tough rhetoric. The final move in the geoeconomic chess game has not yet been played. Whether Trump will sign the final level of tariffs, the official approval of European retaliation, and the outcome of the WTO process will become clear in the second half of the year. But Macron has broken his passive poor image. France has become the first major Euro power to openly threaten economic reciprocity against the US. This move has changed the political reflexes of a broad industrial belt stretching from Germany to the Czech Republic. It has brought the China-Europe axis into the equation and elevated the defense economy debate within NATO from a topic of discussion to an urgent issue. Finally, the transatlantic trade chaos raises the question of who stands to gain, and the answer is not clear. If US industry experiences price increases for imported semi-finished products in the short term, domestic producers will gain an advantage, but inflationary pressure will be passed on to consumers. European exporters will lose market share but may find new niches in China and South America. The macro picture suggests that neither side will emerge as the winner. This is exactly what Macron's concept of a multipolar world predicts. The trade war, which has become a symbolic arena of multipolarity, may accelerate the rewriting of global supply chains. France has chosen to go on the offensive rather than remain on the defensive in this game. This is exactly what President Donald Trump did not expect. What do you think about this issue? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay informed about new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.